IAH206, Section 1, Team 4. All Things Climate Institution. Final Project. Tanzania is a large country in eastern Africa with the African Great Lakes Range. Parts of the country are in southern Africa. Tanzania has a population of 51.82 million. Tanzania is the presidential constitution republic, and since 1996, its official capital city has been Dodoma. European colonialism began in mainland Tanzania during the late 19th century when Germany formed German East Africa, which gave way to British rule following World War I. Following their respective independence in 1961 and 1963. Lifestyle. Tanzania GDP is low, means no money to change or prepare or adopt. High dependence on no renewable resources and a greater carbon footprint. About 125 ethnic groups. 99% of Tanzanians are African descent, with small numbers of Arab, European and Asia descent. 41% of population under age 15, which means hard to adopt. Economy of Tanzania. Before the Industrial Revolution and Global Revolution, Tanzania ranked second among East Africa communities and 12th in Africa, dependent in entirety on agriculture, and crops were limited geographically and climatically to a small portion of the country. Economy became vulnerable to price fluctuations and weather shocks. Was now developed in tourism and industry. The post-industrial revolution, global improvisation. After Industrial Revolution and Global Revolution, Tanzania experienced a considerable change in their economy, had an economy turnaround leading in sector of industry construction contribute 22% GDP in 2013. Economy is still very dependent on the climate due to large proportion of GDP associated with climate-sensitive activities such as agriculture. Has been victim to climate hoods, fossil fuel burning and current emissions relative to other countries. In the year 1971, fossil fuel energy consumption was at 9%. During the year 1971 to 1993, fossil fuel consumption only declined. From the year 1999 to present, fossil fuel use has increased. The emission of fossil fuel in Tanzania is at 14.4%. United States has emission of fossil fuel at 83.3%. Deforestation and forest degradation. From year 1990 to 2005, there were 412,000 hectares annum cleared, which equally about 1.1% of total forest area. Deforestation and degradation is source of most energy. High deforestation rate directly contributes to carbon footprint. Deforestation accounts for 10 to 15% of carbon emissions globally.
Vulnerability 1. Hazard here is that sea level is rising due to the El Nino effect. The sensitivity of this is that inundation in low-lying coastal areas are possible elevated salination of coastal aquifers. The exposure here is that economic cost growth volatility is migration of fishery and the seafood market. The economic vulnerability is that soil salinization will influence the growth of crops. Social impact is that flood of salt water backward will damage the urban infrastructure construction. Vulnerability 2. Hazard here is that increased temperature decreases the maize growth, which is 1/3 of the country's revenue. The sensitivity is that farmers live on crops not only for food but also for revenues. Exposure here is that a higher chance of poverty and food insecurity. The social impact is that people have food shortages as temperature rising since decrease of the maize growth. Economic loss is that the farmers are losing their revenue. Vulnerability 3. The hazard here is that greater evaporative losses from increased temperatures and runoff from increased rainfall. Sensitivity here is that health risks to population around farms and soil erosion and crop damage. The exposure is that health hazards, farming jobs, and loss of crops. Economic impact is that droughts thus sludge are major economic cost, not only damaging farmland but also infrastructure. Ecological impact is that causes a serious hydrological imbalance. Vulnerability 4. A higher temperature is an increased health issue which causes malaria. It's the largest cost of lives in Tanzania. The exposure here is that there's increase of orphanages and people lose valuable family members. Economic impact is that people lose laborers. The social impact is that women and children are more vulnerable to malaria than men due to the roles they play in society. The slide here illustrates the presence of malaria in Tanzania. Vulnerability 5. Increased drought and erratic rain and pests. The sensitivity here is that food security issues, as it is hard to grow against these weird patterns. The exposure here is that the worst food shortage is February and March. Economic. Poorer households will sell their crops to traders at a low price to meet immediate cash needs, only to buy food back in times of shortage when the price is high. The social impact is that in times of food shortage, farmers often start harvesting crops prematurely, which is called green harvesting, and they ultimately don't get nearly as much money for them. Opportunity 1. Rivers rising creates stronger currents. Prospect here is that increases in hydroelectric power. The exposure is that Tanzanian people are able to save money with a more abundance of power, and the economic cost of this is an increase in hydroelectric power from rivers rising creates stronger currents to turn generators. Ecological impact is higher water levels in lakes and rivers, making it easier to create hydroelectric power. Opportunity 2. Increased rainfall creates better growing conditions. The prospect here is that increased grazing area for livestock and better land for growing crops. Exposure is that more livestock means more money for farmers and cheaper meat for buyers. Economics is that there's more profit for the farmers and more availability with cheaper prices for the consumer. The ecological impact is that there's just flat out better growing conditions and better grazing areas.
The opportunity 3. Ecological change is increased rain creates better growing conditions. Prospect is increased corn crop production. Exposure is increased corn export to countries with drier seasons due to climate change. Political is better relationships with countries. And economic is making more money. Opportunity 4. Ecological change is great climate creates a diversity amount of animals. Prospect. Tourism industry growing really fast. Exposure is creates a great national income, and social is creates a lot of working opportunities for residents, and economic is good national income from tourism. Opportunity 5. Ecological change is good amount of natural resources like oil, gas, gold, and so on. Prospect is attract more investors come to the country and create more working opportunities. Exposure is increased exports amount to other countries. Political is good effect on reputation, and economic is attract more investors and creates more working opportunities. Climate change affecting vulnerability people. Women, limited access to health and education resulting from low incomes. Physical abuse by men, including beating, divorce, and so on. Food insecurity and early pregnant. For poor people, food insecurity, lack of clean and safe water, poor access to education and health service, and living conditions are extremely bad. Elderly, health, diminishes personal security due to old age, and discrimination against the elderly in the delivery of basic health service. Children, 44% of population, and vulnerable to poor health, abuse, and lack of other basic needs. Floods can easily destroy family by increasing the spread of disease. Poor household condition and poor community contents. And child labor. Trade-off to climate change. Hydroelectric power increase from rivers and lakes. More space was created by cow due to better growing conditions. Increased corn production with revenue from the United States. And more abundance of food options means less profit to individual farmers. And lower power costs can cause instability in the economy. Political platform in UNFCCC and Kyoto. Tanzania ratified and accepted on August 26, 2002. January 27, 1989, UN adopted IPCC through resolution of the General Assembly. And the IPCC submitted its first assessment report to the Second World Climate Conference in August 1990s, and this report served as basis of negotiating the UNFCCC. Although Tanzania, along with over 150 other countries, signed the convention in Brazil in June 1992, which was then ratified in March 1996.
Tanzania political platform in UNFCCC in Kyoto. In pursuit of her commitment under the convention, Tanzania has been undertaking climate change studies since 1993. In 1997, Tanzania played a pivotal role in the negotiations that led to the adoption of the Kyoto Protocol. In that year, Tanzania chaired the group of 77 and China spoke for the group. By submitting this communication, Tanzania wishes to demonstrate her unreserved will and desire to meet international obligations under the UNFCCC. The base year for the development of the inventory of greenhouse gas emissions and removals in Tanzania was 1990. Tanzania political policies, National Environment Policy in 1997, the National Transport Policy in 2003, the Environmental Management Act in 2004, the National Forest Policy in 1998, the Wildlife Policy in 1999, and the National Energy Policy in 2003. Tanzania and Paris, COP. Tanzania submitted its new climate action plan to the UNFCCC. INDCS comes well in advance of a new universal climate change agreement, which will not be reached at the UN Climate Conference in Paris in December this year. National Climate Change Strategy 2012 and the Zanzibar Climate Change Strategy 2014 comprehensively elaborate adaptation and mitigation actions. Tanzania has negligible emissions of greenhouse gases, whereby per capita emissions are estimated at 0.2 TCO2e1. The country has a total of 88 million hectares of land areas, of which 48.1 million are forested land, with a current estimated total of 9.032 trillion tons of carbon stock.
This implies that Tanzania is a net sink. International programs, sustainable land use and forestry U.S. aid programs in Tanzania help mitigate climate change and improve forest management and sustainable agriculture. The Special Climate Change Fund project in Tanzania, aimed at incorporating climate change into integrated water resources management, and the Adaptation Fund program, managed by the UN, an environmental program reduce vulnerability, economy, and livelihood of Tanzania. COP stands for Conference of Parties, is a program. It's the greatest decision-making body of the convention. Tanzania communicates to COP information regarding human-induced emissions by sources and removal by sink of greenhouse gases. COP identifies the priority capacity building needs and gaps in regional systematic observations in Tanzania. UNFCCC signed Kyoto Protocol, which legally binded them to not allow heat trapping greenhouse gases to rise and stay between 12 and 19% in 1990. They are now 7.9% beyond that. Discussed at the 16th Conference of Parties in the UNFCCC, part of the reason for this was to ask for funding to help stop the emission of heat-trapping gases. REDD+, Tanzania, being one of the REDD+ pilot countries, has been planting 1.5 million trees per year on top of the 33.5 million hectares of land set aside for reserves. They displayed a plan to explore forest degradation in other countries at the 16th conference. We want the Annex 1 countries to discuss this, keeping their geostrategic and political interests in mind. CDM. Tanzania has yet to benefit from the CDM since introduced in 2009. Only 2% of CDM projects are in Tanzania.
After the Paris COP, Africa as a whole will unite to become a key player to further adapt to and combat climate change. Tanzania is fully aware that the post-Kyoto agreement that will be negotiated will not remove all climate changes facing the world today. Tanzania would like to reiterate that humanity must not merely reduce but must end carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels this century. Tanzania would like to keep global warming below the 2 °C threshold, as well as Africa is the only global region with the highest proportion of people living below the USD $2 a day that impose a cap to consumption opportunities. If economic strategies have to be built around low carbon intensive pathways, how will this affect and restrict growth in terms of per capita GHG emissions in low Africa? Low carbon growth is definitely a positive thing if invested in and provided with adequate support to ensure implementation in terms of finance, capacity, and technology transfer. Tanzania wants to hold countries accountable on their pledge to keep the rise to under 2 °C. Tanzania would like to see a clear commitment to reduce individual and collective emissions. Public finance should be the main source consistent with the views and opinions expressed by many other African countries. Tanzania also plans to plant 2 million more trees each year, as well as Tanzania plans to set aside more money each year of this land to reserve as forest areas. Financial costs and social analysis for future generations. According to our recommendations, if Africa can become a whole, like the developing country version of the European Union, it will benefit every country in Africa, not just Tanzania. Although Tanzania as a developing country really has not had that much to do with climate change, attending the conference would be a really good chance for Tanzania with its economic growth and to have a better future. Also, to find a balance between the country's development and the environment would be hard for Tanzania. But if the country wants to speed up its globalization pace like China and India, those developing countries, while experiencing the huge economic growth, also suffered with the environmental issues. If Tanzania wants to become a country like China and India in the future, the financial cost would be high. Tanzania has lots of natural resources, and they need to come up with a long-term sustainable development plan. If Tanzania wants to be a sustainable country, the whole country's industry needs to be planning to transfer from first to second industry like agriculture and manufacturing industry to third industry like tourism and industry and other service industries. Vulnerable groups, present and future. Indigenous peoples. Our recommendation is that the carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuels must end in this century because it affects the indigenous people of the land who have been using those fossil fuels as sources of energy for many years. They must now find alternative ways that will follow them into the future. The indigenous people of the land would achieve justice through a recommendation because they would be helping to save their land by making minor changes in carbon dioxide emission. Women. Our recommendation would give them access to safe spots with healthcare, food, and water for oppressed women and kids, as they are not tolerant to change as tolerant to change as men are. Having limited food access for food and healthcare, women cannot work like men do. They're typically abused. Our recommendation would make their lives better. Elders in Tanzania. Our recommendation is to contribute toward poverty eradication for older people. Lack of entrepreneurial skills. There's a lack of entrepreneurial skills, so there's a need to build capacities for older people for the purposes of enabling them to participate in income-generating activities. Older people can gain access and loan schemes on a basis of equal treatment. Change the social protection of older at local, regional, and national levels. We also need to provide enhanced educational services for available and affordable safe drinking water. In conclusion, Tanzania has been relatively well engaged in political matters concerning climate change for the past decade. Climate change is a serious topic which Tanzania needs to act in regards to. Tanzania should continue to promote staying below the 2 degrees Celsius threshold and should follow our active engagement plan after the Paris COP.